and I'm glad to say he joins us now. And maybe, Elijah, you can explain how it is that the European public is not only permitting, but apparently enthusiastically cheering on the destruction of their own economies and their own standard of living. I thought that we were supposedly an educated people, the Europeans. Explain.
Hello, George, and thank you for having me. We are educated people, and we have been gathering this education since many centuries. However, the problem of Europe is we are colonialist, and we started since after the First Crusade in 1096, and then it came the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French, the Hungarian, everybody came, and in Europe there is a mentality of being a colonialist. However, in Eastern Europe, they've been under the control of colonialism. And now we find ourselves under the US colonialists. And we have the full control of the Americans over our security and above all on our economy. What we are doing today in Europe is we are really committing suicide. We're taking decisions after decision against not only the will of the European population, but also against the European interest and the interest of the leadership. What we see between Russia and Europe, there have been a very close partnership, particularly on economy and energy. Today, we hear Germany saying that if I give up on the Russian gas, that will cost me $220 billion. We hear the French saying that they're going to pay in 3 months an additional 17 billion euro as a difference of price of gas. We hear people screaming, prices going up, and we only understand that there is a war in Ukraine and that there are sanctions that we have imposed, initially on ourselves, publicly on Russia, but that is not only a boomerang effect hitting us, but is really starting from the start, is hitting the heart of Europe. However, we still hear the European leaders taking decisions saying next week we are going to increase the sanctions. On the other hand, we hear the Germans saying, we want the Russian gas, we want to deal with Russia, we want to lift the sanction as soon as there is a ceasefire. But then we hear the Americans saying that we don't mind having a ceasefire in Ukraine, talking on behalf of the Ukrainians. We hear the Americans blocking and suspending the gas line that comes from Russia to Europe. We hear the Americans increasing their troops in Europe and establishing 150 nuclear bomb on European continent. For which reason we need all that? We're not at war with anybody. But it's a good lesson for Europe that has been colonizing other population and other countries to be colonized today by the US and be aware that the US is exerting its dominance over Europe, the only part that is totally obedient, in the hope that President Emmanuel Macron comes out in one piece, which is doubtfully, after the legislation election. So we are in a situation that Europe is becoming poorer and poorer by our own doing, and the Americans looking at us and saying, my own interest is to impose my dominance on the richest continent, that is Europe.
Now, of course, there's a spectrum, Elijah, in all of this, as in everything in life. Britain would be probably at the worst end of it. We've just sent 8,000 soldiers, and bear in mind that the entire British Armed Forces would fit into a provincial football stadium. Villa Park is the analogy I often give. I'm talking Army, Navy and Air Force, all of them in one stadium, not Wembley Stadium, in a provincial stadium in Birmingham. We're sending 8,000 new soldiers to Finland, a neutral country which is not a member of NATO, but which is helpfully a stone's throw, literally, from Finland to St. Petersburg, Russia's second biggest city. The rulers of Britain, including a particularly obtuse Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, the least qualified Foreign Secretary I'm sure that we have ever had, she was warning China in the week. Britain warning China about what it must do and must not do. France would appear to be the other end of that spectrum. The French people, as always, are the first to react. And Macron has serious pressure, not just from the left and the right in the legislative elections that are imminent, but on the street. A friend of mine, Naila, has just sent me a video of the French people revolting in Paris in significant numbers, and of course the usual brutal CRS response. What about elsewhere in Europe? There's no Britain and there's no France. Do the rest fall somewhere in between?
Well, first of all, in the UK, they like to say that we punch above our weight. And what they do is they're taking the leadership ahead of all the European continent, speaking in the name of the continent, even if they are no longer part of the European Union, and making sure that the Americans can hear what they are saying, that they are the avant-garde of the battle against Russia. Secondly, Macron is in difficulty today. This is why the Americans are taking over, because Germany is feeling on its own, and France had the presidential election with a president that won with 27% on the first round only, and on the second round with 58, with the reason why he got the 58 is only because people did not want to vote for Marine Le Pen, not because they want him and not because they like to see him back again. And as I said previously, people are waiting for the end of the election to go in the street and manifest against Macron, even those who voted for him. And until 12 to 19 of June next month, we won't have any reaction from France opposing the US doing in Europe or trying to look after the European interest. This because there are the legislative elections, and because Macron is not going to have the majority and will need to form a coalition with the leftist or perhaps some of the right wing. So he is not in a strong position. This is why he's delegating most of his power in relation to what's happening in Ukraine to the European community here in Brussels. And the European leaders who have no power whatsoever, but to speak exactly in the name of the US interests and against the interests of the European population. We're talking about hundreds of millions of people who disagree with their leaders and what they are saying to Russia and how they are behaving with Ukraine, that basically Ukraine is not the decision maker, but is Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State in the US. So this is the situation we are in. People manifest in the street because they are against what's happening, because they are against the increase of prices, because of the increase of price of gas and gasoline. Food is going to a price that have never been seen here in Europe. And I don't think people will be able to hold on for very long. Now there is a complaint everywhere about the financial situation, and people will, at a certain point, react against their leader and the decision leaders are taking. Now, when this is going to happen, so far there is a war in Ukraine. Yes, the first propaganda war was won by the US. Now there is a strong feeling, an anti-Russian strong feeling. However, the situation is turning now, and there are many voices saying, well, why don't Ukraine sign a deal of neutrality with Russia and the US stop exerting its influence over the European continent? On the other hand, the Americans have managed to inject some fear in the head of a number of the population I talked to, and they are afraid that Russia may expand this occupation beyond Ukraine, which is not true because people don't know what is the origin of the crisis, and that the origin of the crisis said it exactly Bill Clinton in his recent article that he published at The Atlantic by saying against all the advisors, he worked on expanding NATO and prepare himself to confront Russia. This is the real reason behind everything is happening. It is the US will impose on Europe. It is Europe being colonized by the Americans today.
Lastly, and I'm grateful for your time, Elijah, as always, what about Germany? Here we have a situation where the German labor unions remain powerful, and the German employers in a mighty manufacturing country are united in saying that these sanctions are going to destroy our economy. And very quickly, fantastic increases in the prices of essentials already. The government of little soldier Schulz and his toxic green allies was scarcely from the beginning in a secure parliamentary situation. Can the German government really survive the enmity of both the employers and the employed as the German economy begins to grind to a halt?
This is a very good question. The problem in Europe is we have a country like, I've seen the president of North Macedonia the other day talking on a television, on an interview, with the flag of his country and next to it the flag of NATO. So you have a country with 1 million or 1,080,000 inhabitants or 2 million speaking in the name of 65 million or 85 million people like in Germany or France. The problem is that the Americans have discovered and imposed Eastern Europe that was under the Warsaw Pact with the Soviet Union, and they have taken all these countries under their wings. And today we hear Poland saying, I don't want to pay in ruble the gas that I'm taking in Russia, and I don't need it. But then Poland goes and take the gas from Germany. That is exactly the same gas, and Germany needs to pump 5 times extra to supply Poland, that is having a show off just to flex its muscle for nothing, and yet still taking the Russian gas. So we have all these countries, the 27 countries that form the European Union, speaking as a majority in the name of the major country like Germany and France, and a little bit Italy and Spain. However, Germany today is left on its own. Germany needs France to stand by it, to support it, as the 2 biggest countries in Europe that can stand against the Americans. Merkel, the Chancellor Merkel did that during the era of Donald Trump. And Macron had more courage to stand against the US will and contest decisions that were incompatible with the interests of the European Union and the European continent. Today, until the end of the legislation election in France, Germany is on its own. It is it can't face all the Eastern European on one side, and what the Americans are doing, exerting its hegemony on some of the smaller Western European countries. Germany is suffering a lot today. France is suffering, Belgium is suffering, Spain is suffering, but Germany is supposed to be one of the two leaders that are leading Europe, is left alone today to face the Americans and is not capable, as you rightly said, with the Green Party, to face the Americans and to take the right decisions. And the right decision is what the Germans try from time to time to tell us. They don't want to keep the sanction on Russia. And what the Americans did as a last point is to establish a military operational room in Germany to compromise Germany and any attempt to establish good relationship with Russia. However, bringing 40 nations in Germany to support Ukraine and organize the intelligence information to Ukraine and the supply of weapons to Ukraine from Germany is a way to tell Germany that we are going to break your will if you don't abide by our diktat or our objective to try and defeat Russia and Ukraine, which is an impossible task that is not going to happen. And what is going to happen is damaging the relationship between Russia and Germany. And this is exactly what the Americans want to do.
Elijah Magni, as always, peerless review of the European horizon. Thanks for joining us.